Hi, welcome back to WTF is Happening to Me, the hormone symphony no one told us about. I'm Amy Levin, and I'm here again with Dr. David Kamnitzer, author of Why Are Your Hormones Moaning? In our last episode, we talked about the return of the sacred and how hormones are brilliant messengers translating the dialogue between our inner and outer worlds. Today, we're diving into what happens when those messengers get tangled, when we're wired and tired, and we'll explore how reframing hormonal changes, asking better questions, and even embracing some stress situations can turn exhaustion into evolution. Dr. David, I appreciate this time with you. And I say let's start again with the hormones because it's such an important part of the conversation and it deserves its own spotlight.
Okay, do you have a particular question or request?
Well, yeah, I do. Let's talk about let's talk about the main hormones that women they experience during their whole life. But during menopause, what starts to happen to, we could say, the top 3 or 4 hormones, and what those messengers are telling us when we start to lack some of them.
Okay.
So some basic stuff first.
So when we talk about male and female sex hormones, if we are talking about the main ones, we're talking about 3 of them. But before I get into them, it's important to understand that the hormonal picture is kind of like a symphony, and there's a lot of interaction, not only among the 3 we're going to talk about, but there's also a lot of interaction between those 3 hormones and other hormones. So for example, just to keep in mind, especially with women, thyroid hormones play a really big part in the experience of well-being or lack of well-being and energy levels in a person. And there's a lot of complex interactions that I'm not going to get into between thyroid hormones and pituitary hormones and what's going on in the brain and how that relates to the sex hormones and the liver and other hormones. So I need to preface what I'm saying so that I'm not dumbing it down to the point where it's not valid or useful. Okay. All right. So with that preamble, I think what you're pointing at is looking at the main estrogen, which is called estradiol, and progesterone and testosterone. And so from a human survival point of view, the estrogen levels rise in the first part of a cycle of a woman, and the progesterone levels rise more in the second half. And the whole point is to prepare at that level. The whole point is to grow the uterine lining, prepare the uterine lining for implantation. And if there is implantation, then the progesterone levels stay high during pregnancy. And if not, then both estradiol and progesterone levels drop at the end of the cycle, and then your uterine lining breaks down and you bleed. So that's the basic survival role of what's going on there. And if all you're looking at is that, then you're really not getting a very big picture of what's going on, because it turns out that these hormones, when they're in their natural state, do so many other things. I think we were hinting maybe last time about the fact that estradiol, the main estrogen, it gets kind of a bad rap because people hear about estrogen dominance, which actually is a function of metabolic imbalance that is associated with insulin resistance and the overconsumption of carbohydrates. And so there's this erroneous idea that estradiol is the enemy, that estrogen is the enemy. And that is, that's like saying that cholesterol is the enemy. It's not valid. And where it really breaks down is in the inappropriate extrapolation in the scientific community, because estradiol levels tend to be high in people that have this metabolic imbalance. They erroneously conclude that if you give estradiol, that would be bad. But it turns out to not be the case. But we don't give estradiol to women that are cycling because they're making, unless they're starving themselves or they're Olympic gymnasts that are working out 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, they have enough estradiol. But anyway, so that's what's going on at the most basic fundamental level. But it turns out, for example, that estradiol, when it's balanced with progesterone and right amount of testosterone, all of that has enormous benefits in many other areas. Cardiovascular health, bone health, skin quality, cognitive functioning. And so, unfortunately, I don't know if you're old enough to remember this, but in the WHI study, that was a study about 30 years ago that scared women away from taking these hormones. And it was based on a lot of faulty science. They didn't differentiate between the sources of these hormones, uh, and again, they made these erroneous extrapolations that since high estradiol is present in a lot of these metabolic disorders, because there's a different kind of estrogen that can turn into estradiol if you have too much fat because you ate too much carbs and you didn't burn it for energy, but then the rest got stored as fat. So they concluded that it would be dangerous to give estradiol. And and then also they made erroneous conclusions with regard to the impact of progesterone because they didn't differentiate between a synthetic drug that is patented, uh, called the brand name is Provera. And it turns out that even though Provera and natural progesterone have similar effects on the uterine lining, with regard to all the other benefits, they have opposite impact. So due to this, um, they scared the women away. And in my opinion, this was a very evil thing to do because when the women stopped this, they started to become more anxious, they started to become more depressed, and then that was really good for the pharmaceutical business. Um, and because I think I mentioned last time that you cannot patent a natural molecule. You can't patent a naturally occurring molecule. So there's a lot going on there in terms of the money control game. So, um, and so another mistake is a lot of uh, women are afraid of testosterone. And partly because of the, cartoon-like images of bodybuilders and stuff, but also because there's a condition called PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and that is also due to a metabolic disorder of insulin resistance. But it turns out that in PCOS, uh, the balance between estradiol and progesterone and testosterone gets out of whack because the progesterone gets out of whack. And so the testosterone gets too high. And women start acting and looking kind of masculine. They tend to get facial hair. They tend to get acne, things like that. And so, again, now testosterone becomes the bad guy. But really, that's not the bad guy. And it turns out that one of the main ways to help women with PCOS is to give them high amounts of natural progesterone. So it's one of those situations where a little knowledge is very dangerous, and there are a lot of forces that would like you to be scared of all of this. And then it also turns out with PCOS that there's a lot going on with the thyroid and therefore the liver. And it turns out that in order to help women with PCOS, almost always we want to address thyroid hormone levels as well. And that's a whole other story that is huge, but let me give you the Cliff Notes version there. And that is that, do you remember we talked about the difference between standard lab reference ranges based on sick Americans
Yes.
and what's optimal? Or I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version of another tragedy. And that is there are tens, if not hundreds of millions of women just in North America who are either not put on any thyroid medication or they're put on a pharmaceutical drug called levothyroxine, commonly known as Synthroid, which is a which is T4, which is a thyroid hormone that's in its weaker state. And then they do lab work, and usually they're just monitoring thyroid stimulating hormone and T4 or free T4 levels. And then those fall into the normal range of the sick women in America. And they're told that you're fine, but they're still feeling lousy. And so one of the tragedies is that in standard blood work panels, they're not monitoring the most powerful thyroid hormone, which actually has the effect at the receptor site, which is called T3. And we want to particularly look at the free T3 levels. And then also, the doctors are afraid to give more thyroid than would put the woman out of the normal statistical range because they're afraid that they would have their license taken away. And because what would happen if they took the amount of thyroid, the correct type of thyroid in the right amount, is that the T3 levels would go above the reference range and the TSH levels would go below the reference range. And if someone didn't understand endocrinology, they would be shocked that the TSH levels were so low and they would send you to the emergency room because low TSH levels are also associated with Graves' disease or hyperthyroid. But it turns out that if you give a woman higher levels of T3, of thyroid hormone that leads to higher levels of T3, and the person doesn't have Graves' disease, there's no danger in having a low TSH levels. In fact, from long-term studies, it actually is associated with higher levels of wellness. So you can see how confusing it is and how discombobulating it is. And then there's the holistic aspect too, because many people, because of the amount of toxins are in our society, our livers are not functioning that well. And it turns out that the conversion from the weaker thyroid hormone to the stronger thyroid hormone, 70% of that conversion takes place in the liver. So if your liver is not in good shape, maybe you need to also address the liver. And so you can see how the normal way of looking at thyroid health And the normal way of looking at estradiol and progesterone and testosterone, you could see how unless you were an expert in this area, and most doctors are not, you can see how the counsel you would get and the mindset you would have that would lead to that counsel is erroneous.
So as a patient, I
I'm
go,
not meaning to depress everybody,
yeah, no.
but,
But
but you've got to first see what a
yeah,
mess, you got to see what a mess it is first in
yes.
order to be able to navigate and understand why and how it's a mess and how you might extricate yourself from that mess.
So I'm going to ask a pretty practical question, but as a patient, and I have the pellet, so I go in for my hormone replacement, and every month they test, my estrogen levels for testosterone, progesterone. When we're talking about the thyroid, I know that the person who specializes for me in my hormones we don't ever talk about the thyroid. And then once a year, when I go to my GP, they might draw blood for the thyroid, I'm assuming, but they're those superficial ones that you're talking
Yes.
about. So how often, unless I was symptomatic, if I'm not symptomatic, how often should we be looking at some of these deeper thyroid, the free, that's a tongue twister, the free T3 and some of these other levels, or as a patient that I should be advocating for?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
So let me take a deep breath.
Okay.
Okay. So first, I had red flag alarm bells go off when you told me that the person that's evaluating your hormones isn't looking at your thyroid.
Yes.
So my mind goes ding, 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 ding. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200.
I mean, I know that they're just getting whatever my GP orders once a year, right? They look at that, but that's all they're getting.
Right. So this tells me that this person has not been advancedly trained in a holistic approach to hormone optimization, or they've decided to not practice what they were taught.
Okay.
So those are my big red flags
All
because
right.
remember the symphony
Yeah.
conversation?
Yeah.
Yes. And so it turns out that, you know, as a doctor, first of all, if you're a good doctor, if you're an ethical doctor, your first commitment is to follow the Hippocratic Oath, which is to do no harm. And then within that, if you want to be excellent, you really need to decide what your niche is going to be and establish networks of people who have other niches of expertise. So that's the first thing that I would say. The second thing that I would say is that whenever you get your thyroid evaluated, at a minimum, and you might want to write this down,
Yeah, I am.
have your TSH done and your free T4 and your free T3. For reasons that are completely insane, when your general practitioner recommends a thyroid panel, uh, they generally do not recommend, they do not include free T3 in the panel, and that's insane because that is the active amount of the most powerful hormone that's actually having an impact on the receptor sites of all of the target cells. Um, and keep in mind that the drug that is prescribed is only T4. So if you're not a good converter from T4 to T3, your test will show that you're normal because they're not testing free T3. And so you basically, the woman knows she's not feeling right. She's feeling wired and tired. She's feeling depressed, whatever. She can't lose weight. Her skin is dry. Her hair is falling out. She's got the blues. She's tired. Oh, but you're fine. Well, no, I'm not fine. Yeah, but you're fine. But what the doctor might say, if they had some integrity, is they would say, I know you're not feeling fine and I don't know how to help you. But that's rare. You know, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So, right? And so that's one thing I want to say. Now, the second thing I want to say to answer your question is because you asked about the frequency of testing, right? Well, first of all, are you interested in just not feeling shitty? Or do you want to feel as good as you can? That's a powerful question.
Yeah, that's a great question because I think when somebody feels shitty, their response is going to be, I just don't want to feel shitty anymore.
Right. And so there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But if you get stuck in that, that's a trap.
Yeah.
It's like, I want to get out of debt. Okay, now I'm out of debt. But until I learn good financial principles, I'll probably be back in debt later. But if all you want to do is get out of debt, who says you're going to learn the laws of finance? Right. So if all you want to do is get out of pain, then once you get out of pain, are you motivated to get any healthier? Right. So this is a huge issue. This is, this is enormous. And so many people don't know how good they could feel.
Yeah.
And
I
if
was just going to say
and if
something.
you've been feeling kind of just over shitty, just a little bit better than shitty for a long time, your brain and your psyche are likely to relate to that like, well, that's just normal. That's just normal aging. And that's the story that you're living. Well, okay, that's normal. That's normal aging. And so you're not motivated to take any action. And so there's an enormous difference between being committed to avoiding pain and being committed to optimal wellness. And they're not the same game. And the deck is stacked against you uh, from an insurance point of view because the insurance companies are not contracted with you to support your optimal wellness. They're contracted with you so that when you're in dysfunction and pain, the doctor will give you a diagnosis and then the insurance company will pay something on that diagnosis. In other words, the way the insurance game is set up, there's no commitment to your optimal wellness. There's a commitment uh, to only paying for diagnostic conditions. And so you're dealing with that whole way of thinking and all of the structures and systems that are associated with that. And so in today's world, um, if you want to really be committed to optimal wellness, you're going to have to pay out of your own pocket. And so that is a whole other thing. And so the doctors that have had it with this insurance game are now dropping out of that. And they're setting up these cash-based concierge practices where they have expertise in a particular niche. They're committed to your optimal wealth in that niche. They're committed to referring to other people who have optimal wellness skills in other areas. But unfortunately, unless you're upper middle class or upper class, you probably can't afford them. And so that's the situation that we're in now. And I say to people, how much are you paying for your monthly car payment? And I say, that's about the amount of money that I would recommend dedicating to promoting your optimal wellness. And if your car is more important than your body, that's something to take a look at. And it's a different way of thinking because we're conditioned that, okay, we pay our insurance premium and then insurance pays the doctor. But that involves all sorts of different things that can muddy the water. And so until you have an insurance company that's enlightened enough to realize that they're going to make more money by having you be well, uh, you've got to go outside that game and either have your own money or you need to be able to be part of cooperatives that pool their money together for these kinds of things. And it's coming. It's coming. But what I'm saying is right now, if you want to break that cycle of just over feeling shitty, you've got to be committed to optimal wellness, and you need to be willing to really look at your value system. And one way to do that is to look at where your money's going. And most people are okay with a $350 a month car payment. But if you ask the person to invest $350 a month, month after month, in promoting their optimal wellness, most people don't want to bite on that. And that is something that has to do inside their own head and heart and their own value system, and to start to think consciously about how highly you value optimal wellness. But most people have even lost touch with what that could be like, what that could feel like if your brain was functioning really on a high level and your energy level was really high and your moods um, were inspired and ambitious, and your body had a lot of energy and you felt sexually attractive and vital. Most people actually have to go back in a memory, probably to a time before the age of about 25, to recall a time in their life where this way of being and operating, uh, they could remember or even get close to it. And that's not going to happen on its own. That connection with that possibility, and not settling for a definition of health and wellness that is basically uh, a description of mediocrity. Uh, and if that is your standard, I think I heard Tony Robbins say once, life will tend to give you what you're willing to tolerate. You know, and if you haven't thought about this clearly, you probably haven't really confronted these issues. And so it's really a heroic journey to be committed to your own well-being, and especially in the area of physical health, because of everything I mentioned about the way the incentive structures are set up to basically keep you on a treadmill of having more symptoms and more symptoms, with more diagnoses, with more insurance company payments, with more pharmaceuticals. And, um, you know, United States spends about 3 times more per capita than any other country on quote unquote health care. But we're at the bottom of the statistics in terms of level of wellness of Americans compared to other countries. And so there's obviously, and insurance premiums are rising rapidly because we're getting sicker and sicker. And so obviously this whole game is coming to a crisis, which, as you know, also can be looked at as opportunity. And so this dovetails right into why are your hormones moaning, as an opportunity to listen and learn, rather than as an argument for the fact that uh, time is your enemy, aging is your enemy, and then you've had the shit scared out of you because of the WHI study, and then you're looking at having to spend money on things you haven't spent money on before, and then you don't know who to go to, you don't know who to trust. And so it really takes an enormous commitment to put together your team that is ethical, knowledgeable, seasoned in their clinical skill sets. Uh, it's not going to happen on its own, is what I'm saying. So that's a very long-winded answer to what you asked me, but what you asked me needed to be unpacked from so many different angles.
And so, because of our Western medicine, and really when you go to the doctor, I know they have their well-being checks. I don't ever feel like it's quite a well-being check. Right? They're always looking for something.
Well, also they're doing testing that's based on statistical norms of sick Americans. You've got to keep that in mind because that colors the decision-making process, which influences the recommendations that are made and which influences what insurance companies will pay for. In fact, just to give you an example of how insidious it is, okay, so male testosterone levels have dropped about 40% over the last 50 or 60 years. Now, not only, if this keeps going, not only is it an enormous crisis because human beings won't be able to procreate normally through sexual intercourse, but there's all sorts of impact of having men with weak testosterone levels that are non-optimal for marriage, for society. Anyway, so what I want to tell you is the levels that were statistically normal for a man, a healthy man, 60 years ago, if you had those same levels now, the doctor would go, oh no, no, your testosterone levels are too high. They're off the bell curve. Oh my God. Well, oh no, we can't have that. We've got to suppress your testosterone levels. That's how dangerous what's happening is. And in fact, the normal ranges, normal, quote, 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 normal ranges of male testosterone levels have gotten so low on the low end that you have to be almost dead before the insurance company will pay for testosterone. That's a great object lesson. And then it turns out that when you do give testosterone to a man, and like I said, I don't recommend giving testosterone normally to men under 40 because that's usually a lifestyle thing where people can make some changes and work it out. But for older men, um, it's just a mess. And I'm giving you an idea of how and why it's a mess and how it shows up and the incredible cost to individuals and society for looking at reality through the lens of statistically normal sick Americans and how that interfaces with insurance companies that don't want to pay for testosterone because if you had the testosterone, you probably wouldn't need drug A, drug B, drug C, and drug D. And then even if you do have higher testosterone levels, um, you might also need to detoxify because there are molecules that could be competing for the receptor sites on your target cells for testosterone. They would require you to have even more testosterone to override that. And so a lot of doctors who are trained in in bioidentical hormone optimization who aren't trained in holistic medicine in terms of detoxification. They'll just give higher and higher levels of testosterone to overcome that resistance. But I don't like to do that. I like to do both. I like to help the person detoxify to clean out the receptor sites and give and make sure the patient's getting the testosterone they need to feel their best. So, you know, it's like Chinese boxes within Chinese boxes within Chinese boxes. And so what I aim to be is someone who not only has advanced training in hormone optimization, but also is well versed in holistic wellness evaluation and practices, and also has a lot of experience in psycho-spiritual impact. And that's something we didn't mention either, because you can go to a person that's well trained in advanced hormone optimization who necessarily isn't that well trained in holistic health or in the psycho-spiritual domain. And uh, but if you want your batting average to be really high, you need to work with someone who either does have those skills or recognizes that they don't have those skills and understands that these other elements come into play, because your hormones are not only responding to your environment and what you're eating and how you're moving, but it's also responding to your moods, your belief systems, your goals, your aspirations, your values, your standards, uh, uh, your traumas. And so this is what gets me up in the morning. Okay. But I'm weird. Okay. What gets me up in the morning is the possibility of this new possibility of this high level of wellness that is our birthright, but because human beings have free will and there are laws of God and there are laws of creation, and even though God doesn't judge you, there are natural consequences to our free will choices. You know, if you're drinking a 64 big gulp of Pepsi and you're praying to have stable blood sugar, it's not going to happen. And so it's not that all doctors have to have as much breadth and depth as I have. That's not the point. But the point is to have a goal that's based on high level wellness and isn't based on just over feeling terrible. And then to really honestly understand the elements that determine that level of wellness. And then for each professional to know what they're good at and to know what they're not good at, and to have a a network of referrals so that the patient is well taken care of. And and that takes a lot of courage, because it goes against all the financial incentives of the insurance companies, how most doctors get paid. If you work, most doctors now work for corporations, and if the doctor stops prescribing so much or stops recommending so many surgeries, they'll probably be asked to leave because they're not making as much money for the corporation. And then you have all of these thought form ideas based on what the media wants you to think. There's the financial issues involved. So it takes a tremendous commitment to understand all of these elements, to really take a deep look at yourself and find out how healthy do you really want to be? And and do you need to completely reevaluate your definition of health? Does health mean just not being in extreme pain and being able to walk around and talk to people and watch TV and do well enough at work to get a paycheck? Or is wellness something way, way, way beyond that, both multidimensionally, quantitatively? And so our definitions are so important. and many of them haven't been examined since you were ever, ever. Like maybe you have a definition of health and wellness, which is I can get out of bed and I can eat and I can walk around and it doesn't hurt too much and I can hold a job and I can talk to my friends and I can get together with them. And so if that's healthy, okay. Okay, if that's health for you and you're satisfied with that and there's not an itch to want more, that's fine. I'm not judging you. But some people, if they did actually reconsider their definition of health and they took out the honesty cards, they would realize they want more than that. And it can be scary to admit to yourself and to commit to declare to the universe that you want more than that. It takes courage. You know, there's an old metaphysician who used to say, the ocean doesn't care if you go to it with a thimble or a bucket. The whole point is whatever container you go to the ocean for to fill, you better be able to be a good steward of that resource.
Is there a country, and maybe this is known or not known, that that is ahead of the game as far as the way they look at wellness
Yeah, I
compared
would
to the
say
West?
I would say in the Asian world, it's
Okay.
very common to go to a park and see scores of people doing Tai Chi every morning. You know, we go to Starbucks, they do Tai Chi, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So and the whole idea of energetically based healthcare is more acceptable there because they've had acupressure for thousands of years. Within the Chinese medicine model, there's a very sophisticated understanding of herbs. Um, and there's also a appreciation of the relationship between human health and the larger cycles. There's a theory in Chinese medicine called the five element theory, which would lend you to think, okay, just because six people have the same symptom doesn't mean the treatment is going to be the same. The way you are being taught to eat in the spring is different than the fall. So this is more individualized, energetically based models. And then, of course, even more ancient than the Chinese model is the model that comes out of India, Ayurveda, which is based on a similar understanding of humans and their place in the universe. Unfortunately, the pharmaceutical uh, industry and agribusiness have now gotten their hands into all of these places. And if you combine that with a sort of a scientific materialism, sophomoric viewpoint, you have a lot of young people in these countries now who don't follow these traditions, where their food supply and their media has been infected by forces that would rather have you be dependent on drug companies.
Yeah, I did notice my kids went to a Chinese immersion school, and a number of the students there were from had a background of Chinese. And when we would go to those families' houses for dinner, they would have an entire spread for dinner. Like it, and dinner lasted for, it felt like for me, for, I mean, this beautiful way, forever. It wasn't a few dishes, sit down and eat. It was a great amount of, I was like blown away. I said, did you do this just for us? Because I was like, oh, you didn't have to. And they said, no, we do this every night. I was like, oh my goodness. And
Do you
they
know there's,
appreciated their food while they were eating. It was an event.
but a lot of it's getting lost. Like, for example, there's an interesting phenomenon now with young men in Asia uh, who are so into video games and dopamine hits and all that stuff that they've lost and their testosterone levels have dropped so much that they're not interested in sex anymore. And
Recently heard something about it.
yeah, and so this is becoming a big deal. I mean, if you look at it from a large, big picture lens, if you look at it from the continuation of the human species on planet Earth, if you look at the role the of the of the dynamism of the interplay of masculine and feminine energies in in the human experience and the impact that has on families and the strength of marriages. Uh, you know, there's an old expression, weak men make weak societies. And if you are interested in having a society that's ripe for communism, fascism, dictatorship, giving up your sovereignty for quote unquote security, you want to have weak men and you want to kill the strong men off it during war. And so if you look at what's happened over the last 50 or 60 years from that lens, it can be a real eye opener. Well, gee, why are there all these wars going on all the time? Well, gee, why are testosterone levels dropping the way they are? You know, if you want to control a society, if you want to break up families, if you want people to not have financial stability, if you want the mother to have to go to work and not be able to stay home with her child when the child is young, what a perfect way to do it.
With all the hormonal changes that happen so far that we see naturally,
What do you mean naturally?
as we're going through menopause, right?
Yeah,
Like that decline. So far, that looks to be the route, the pathway that women go
yeah.
through. Is there a way that we can rephrase it as an intelligent reorganization rather than we're always often told that it just is what it is and it's a breakdown. It's what it
Well,
feels.
I think I addressed
We
that.
did
That
touch it a little
I
bit, but
think
I'd
we
like to
addressed
just
it in the fact that uh, if you look at the way life has been on this planet for a long time, uh, until a few hundred years ago, most men and women didn't live much over 45 or 50. And so there really wasn't a impetus to really be concerned about quality of life after 50. And so it's really only been in the last few hundred years that you have a lot of women now living over 50. They died of infections, sanitation issues, uh, uh, lack of technology, et cetera. So that needs to be appreciated. And the fact now that women are living into their 80s, would you like to be a woman who has virtually no estradiol, virtually no progesterone, almost no testosterone for those 30 years?
not right. I'm not evolved enough as a being to not have those.
Right. Me neither as a man. And so obviously there are things you can do in terms of uh, how you eat, how you move, how you think that can optimize what you can do genetically right now, but especially with the toxins, with the toxic load right now, makes it even more difficult. And, getting out in the sun is huge, being active is huge, having goals that inspire you is huge. And some people will be able to do that and still have the level of health they want. But most people won't be able to do that without some training wheel right now.
Yeah.
And to
I'm
be
gonna,
able to responsibly provide that training wheel in a context where it doesn't become a benign drug and an excuse to not be responsible for your life and your lifestyle choices and your inner world is a very delicate balance, just like it's a very delicate balance whenever you introduce a powerful technology into a society. The level of spiritual maturity, if it doesn't rise with the power of the technology, we know what happens. We know that that society ends up imploding upon itself. And it's happened over and over and over again. Uh, and we have, at the soul level, we have a memory of all of these civilizations that did that, where the technological development got ahead of the spiritual ethics and understanding. And if you understand that, then you can understand what the challenge and the opportunity of today is. Are we going to repeat that pattern, or are we going to reclaim our sovereignty and have technology be in service to love, be in service to life, be in service to God's laws and creation and the laws of creation? Or are we going to give our power away to the beast? And that's really that's really the graduation test that is in front of us now as a group of people. And then there's a subset of people, sometimes they're called light workers or star seeds, who were pre-coded before this incarnation to be here, to midwife, to be a living bridge between what some people call Christ consciousness and human life, human being, the physical body, the way we structure our society, our systems, our processes, how we relate to the earth. And uh, for those of us who were coded that way, uh, it's a challenging journey, but it's a very rewarding journey because in order to compassionately serve humanity, we had to temporarily forget who we were so that we could live like they live, so that we could have compassion for people, and we could, through our own experience of extricating ourselves from that amnesia, we could look other people in the eye and we could say, it is possible. And I'm just like you. I've been betrayed. I've been afraid. I've failed. I've been bamboozled. But the only difference between me and most people is there's something in me that didn't allow me to give up, and it's that humility but boldness at the same time that to me is a mature type of spirituality that's grounded and is practical. And that's why I've always considered myself a practical visionary, and why I've always considered myself a contemporary mystic, because for me, it's all about being that living bridge of Christ consciousness, being that living bridge between heaven and earth and heaven. Uh, because otherwise, my logical mind goes, why would I have, what would have been the point of going through all the hassle of incarnating and being born and agreeing to forget who I am just so I could remember again? Why go through all that if it's not to build some kind of a bridge to extend a balanced spirituality into human life and into our relationship with Mother Earth, why else would I have gone through this? And so that's how I make sense of it for myself.
So you touched on something about, we touched on it last week, and you're doing it now by asking these profound questions to yourself. And you mentioned last week of two different ways of being with a question.
Oh yes, that's really valuable. So you want to
Can
segue
you
into that?
expand on that?
Yeah. So I think one of the reasons I've been able to go deeper than most people have is because I've learned to be with questions in a way that most people haven't learned to be with questions. So I'm glad you brought this up. Uh, that's really appreciate that. So when we were in school, we were rewarded for having accurate answers to questions. And if we could have accurate answers, or at least questions that our authority figures thought were correct, we were rewarded. And if we didn't, we were scolded and we were pressured. And so we sort of were thrown to be a certain way with questions. We were thrown to be that the way you be with questions is you ask questions when you want to get accurate answers. Why else would you ask a question? And in many domains of life, that works really well. So, for example, if I want to go to Pete's Coffee and I want to know where the nearest Pete's Coffee is, I can Google and I can say, hey, Google, where's the nearest Pete's Coffee? And Google will tell me, okay, okay, there you go. Okay, 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 okay. There you go.
It is currently open until 6:30 p.m.
I'm sorry, that's too great. Ask a question. It is automatically answered.
But again, you're asking a question.
94568. Distance 1.4 miles. Phone number +1 925 404 0095. Rating 4.3. Opening hours
Etc.
Friday 5 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. Saturday to Sunday.
So you're getting accurate answers to questions right away. Okay, but these are answers that have a factually, these are questions that have a factually accurate answer. There's a factually accurate answer that there's one and only one Pete's Coffee that I can get to faster than the others, or that's closer to me. And so we've learned that that's the way to be with questions. You ask questions when you want accurate, quick answers. And that works really well when you want to know blah, blah, blah. However, it turns out that there's a whole other category of knowledge that doesn't open up for you if you're only asking questions to get the one right answer. So if you're asking the question, who am I? You won't get very far if you're demanding one right answer. If you're asking open-ended questions like, what are some possible professional avenues I might consider pursuing that resonate with my gifts and talents and strengths? And you're demanding one right answer right now, you're not going to get very far. So there's a whole category of very powerful questions where you don't have access to the power of the answer if you're being that you're looking for the one right answer. So one of the things that's allowed me to live and teach and feel at a level of depth that maybe is not common is that I have the ability, if there's a question I'm sincerely interested in having powerful answers to, I have the ability to be with that question for days, weeks, months, years, decades, until, and that question may lead me to more questions. It may lead me to more questions until I get deeply satisfying answers that are very powerful in my own life. And so unless you know that there's two different ways to be with questions, there's a whole area of knowledge, of true knowledge, of deep inquiry, of deep knowing that you're closed down to. Where is awareness? Where is it? There's not a right answer to that question. What's possible for me? There's not one right answer to that question. What resonates with my joy? There's not one right answer to that question. What are my gifts, talents, and strengths? There's not one right answer to that question. Where does my energy naturally want to go when it's not under any pressure to go anywhere in particular? There's not one right answer to that question, but these are powerful questions. And just being with the question and being with what arises without relating to what arises like, oh, that's the answer. And to shut down being with the question because I have the answer. But to just keep being with the question, just being inside the question, where the question is a space that you've created to allow something to show up that wouldn't have likely shown up if you hadn't created the space of the question. So there's two ways of being with questions. One is to ask a question to get an accurate, timely answer. The one accurate answer. What year was George Washington born? The one right, accurate answer. What's the capital of California? There's one current, right, accurate answer. And that's what we were rewarded for. But how great could my life be? We were never rewarded for being with questions like that. We were never taught how to be with questions like that.
For many people, what you're proposing for that other way to be with the question, because it has not been taught and it doesn't feel natural, it's very uncomfortable. I mean, even in medicine, we go to the doctor because we want an answer and we want a quick answer. We want the one right answer.
And the more you get into chronic conditions, the less likely is there's one right answer.
So how do I know for myself, I had to get comfortable learning to be silent.
I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah. But that's not comfortable for many people.
Yeah. So I think I can give you a gem here. And that is that the key is to first become comfortable with and then get excited about when you know you don't know something. In other words, society will, if you just go along with the societal drift, there's an addiction that goes along with that. that's called an addiction to looking good and having it together. And yet it's really limiting. It's a very limiting addiction, because if you want to learn something new, if you're being that you already know it, you won't learn anything new. And so knowing you don't know something, stay with me here, knowing you don't know something that you're sincerely interested in now knowing, and now you know you don't know it. If you know that knowing you don't know it and being okay with knowing you don't know it actually creates the optimal conditions to eventually know it, then you'll get excited when you know you don't know something. But if you know you don't know something and then you panic and you look for the one right answer to fix it, you'll never know anything except how to get to Pete's Coffee as fast as you can. And most people know what most people know is at the level of how to get to Pete's Coffee as fast as you can. People are being that that's what it is to know something. But that's not the kind of knowing that has real power. The kind of knowing that has real power comes from being able and excited to be with knowing you don't know something, because you know that knowing you don't know something and being okay with knowing you don't know something is the doorway to eventually knowing something truly, profoundly, deeply, like to be at one with, like that kind of knowledge, like to be at one with something, to know it, to love something so deeply, to be at one with something so deeply that you know it, and to know it so deeply that you love it. That kind of living, that kind of living comes and being able to learn, like really learn, like to the point where you have a faith and a trust that isn't blind, but you know it. Like you know that I'm in front of you, that kind of knowing. You don't have to think about it. That kind of knowing only becomes available if you're willing to know you don't know something, and to know that knowing you don't know it and making it okay that you don't know it actually, and that's the doorway to truly knowing something, actually gets you excited when you discover there's something you didn't know, the knowing of which you sincerely want to know. That's what makes you a good student. That's what makes you a good teacher. That's what makes you live in the deep end of the pool. And I say that what more people are wanting, that they don't even know they're wanting, is to live in the deep end of the pool, or at least to have access to the deep end of the pool. And most people have even forgotten that there is a deep end of the pool, and they're trying to get everything from the shallow end of the pool. But there's certain things that can't exist in the shallow end of the pool. There are certain things that only show up in the deep end of the pool. But if you want access to the deep end of the pool, you've got to be willing to know that there's a lot you don't know about the deep end of the pool. And you have to be willing to be open to the possibility that there is a deep end of the pool that you know nothing about. And so that kind of combination of humility and boldness is what it takes. But unless you are talking to a weird person like me, it could take you lifetimes to realize what I'm saying by going through hundreds and hundreds of different versions of shallow ends of the pool, being that that's the whole pool, never even considering the possibility that there are different kinds of waters, there's different kinds of pools, because everybody around you is just reflecting the same kind of pool that you're in. And then that becomes statistically normal. And that's what society validates for you. And so it takes a lot of courage to take the road less traveled. And it's a lot easier if you have a group of people that are interested in doing the same thing. It's a lot easier if you have a person like a teacher or a guide who's gone down the road a little farther than you have. Like I mentioned before, it's a very rare person who can do this all by themselves. Very rare.
You brought me back to a memory. Now, this is with the material world, but you did bring me back to a memory of childhood and that month between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And had multiple friends, and I was the friend that when the presents were put under the tree a few weeks before Christmas Eve or day, I was so excited and curious because of the possibility of what was in the package.
There you go.
It was the best time of the year. Now, I had friends that wanted to know so bad they snooped. They needed to know right away.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved being in that state of not knowing, because it could be, could it be an elephant? I guess it could be a toy elephant, not a live elephant probably in the box. But I got some trips, that you'd open up and maybe you got to go see an elephant, right? Like there was just so many things. My mind it would go everywhere by holding a box and shaking it. And yes, I am doing something in the material world, but I think it's that we can take it into these questions of that feeling of what is it, and being okay not knowing. And because you didn't know, that's where the excitement was.
I think that's a part of it, but I think another reason that people lose that sense of divine innocence is that either wittingly or unwittingly, people we've trusted have violated that trust. Whether it's a parent, a pastor, a car salesman, somebody promising that if you do A, B, and C, you'll have a great life. And when things don't work the way we imagined they would work, there's a disappointment and a disillusionment. And then what happens is most people make up really disempowering stories in relation to these experiences that they don't realize that they're making up, like life is tough, or I guess success just isn't for me, or people can't be trusted, and all of these sort of black and white interpretations of existence that we make up when we're upset, that maybe we don't even consciously know we're making up. And then we unconsciously live those stories as if they were reality. And we don't have any space between the story and reality with a capital R. And that literally, from a quantum physics point of view, that literally collapses the infinite possibilities into a very limited version of reality that you're living. And it takes a while for most people to get a hold of what I just said.
Yeah.
And to really get to the point where they have a willingness and ability to begin to become aware of and examine the stories that are using their life, that are using their money, that are using their body, that are using their attention, that are using their relationships. It takes a lot of courage to do that, and it takes a lot of skill, and you need a guide, because it can make things worse. Like, for example, you can become more aware of these things, and if all you do with that awareness is use it as more fodder to make up more stories, or to judge yourself more, or to judge the situation more, now you're going to feel even worse than before you even heard of spirituality. And so there's a whole set of abilities that's required to go from awareness to mastering your relationship to the thing you just became aware of. And a big part of what I do with my students is we go into excruciating detail about all the steps that are required, whether you do it consciously or unconsciously, all the steps that are required to go from becoming aware of something to eventually taking your power back in relation to whatever that is, and then mastering your relationship to whatever that is. And that really is that's sort of the daily practice on the spiritual path, is that when you become aware of something that either you didn't know about or you were afraid to face, how do you be with that new awareness in a way that it becomes an opportunity for you and not another problem to solve, another burden, another thing? And so most people who don't have a really good guide on the path, eventually that increasing awareness becomes too painful, and then they move away from their spiritual path, and then they do that until that becomes too uncomfortable, and then they go back and put their feet back on the path, and they go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and they don't ever generate enough momentum to really see the fruits of their labor in terms of their journey on the spiritual path. But there are defined structural steps that if you actually do them in a committed way and not just think about them, there is a structure to how you move from awareness about something to mastering something and being free in relation to it, that it can be taught and it can be practiced.
If I look at it, what you said in so many of these things are, I think for some people, especially sometimes me, it's certainly a difference between a concept and non-conceptual. And a lot of what we point to is right non-conceptual on some level. And
Yeah, I look at things kind of on three levels.
yeah,
There's like having an idea about something, and then there's being in the presence of an actual experience of it, and then there's mastering your relationship to that. There's like these three levels. And if you don't live those distinctions, it's hard because you can't be honest about where you are, and you can only effectively get where you want to go by being honest about where you are right now. And so I love the example of the banana split. I can spend 20 minutes describing to you ideas and concepts about banana splits and what they are and how they're made and what makes the difference between a good one and a bad one and the health consequences of eating banana splits. And oh, we could talk about that for days. But that's different than you actually being in the presence of a banana split and having a taste of it, having a direct experience of it. But if you wanted to master your relationship to banana splits, that's a whole something else. So it's really valuable to have in your mental scaffolding this set of distinctions that I'm offering you so you don't fool yourself. And one is not better than the other. There are certain things where having a conceptual understanding about something is fine, if that's all you need. And then sometimes just being in the presence of a great piece of music is fine. Just, that's different than describing the music. But then there are other things, especially if you're getting paid for it, especially if people are putting their money and their soul in your hands. There are certain things you want to really have a mastery about. Okay. And so it's useful to know where you are and what's needed to produce the result you're looking for. And again, we go back to the indoctrination of the educational school system. You were rewarded for having conceptual knowledge. You know, unless you were like in a music program and you had to, you know, do a performance. But that's not common. Most people were rewarded for knowing when George Washington was born. And so that's the level of knowledge that most people have. And if they're being that is real knowledge and that's all knowledge is, that's being in a real shallow pool. And people pay a lot of money to have direct experiences. They go to concerts, they jump off of bridges with bungee cords. People pay a lot of money to have their experiences. And most people live like there's only two possibilities. Most people live like there's only concepts and experience. But that's a trap because your limited concepts will shape your perception of your experience, which will reinforce the concept that shaped the experience. So it's a vicious circle. And unless you know how to put your concepts aside and directly experience, that's a big trap. And a lot of the human potential movement in the beginning was about how to put your conceptual mind on the side and have a direct experience of something. Like instead of just looking at a tree and going, oh, that's a tree, you let go of your concept that that's a tree and you actually be with the tree and you touch the tree and you smell the tree and you commune with the tree and you open up to the tree as a being and you commune with it and you're having a direct experience of the tree that wasn't filtered by your concept, oh, that's just a tree. And it was amazing. It was incredible. People felt alive. But first of all, that's not how most people experience. Most people's experience are filtered by the concepts that they bring unwittingly to the experience, which then reinforces the concept, which continues to reinforce the perception of the limited experience. So that's a trap in and of itself. And then secondly, even people who were able to do that were able to put their concepts over here for a while and then have a direct experience of something. That still doesn't necessarily lead to mastery. It just means that you can have a lot of direct experiences. But if you want to extract the principles and the critical distinctions that give rise to the possibility of certain experiences, that's a level of mastery that goes beyond just being able to have direct experience. And it's opening to the possibility that there is a realm beyond experience that all the great spiritual teachers have pointed at. This 0 point, this nothingness, this infinity, this pure awareness. Different spiritual traditions have different words for it. But my experience is, and it's an extensive amount of experience, is that before someone can open up to that, they first have to disentangle concepts and direct experience so that concepts occur like concepts, direct experience occurs like direct experience. And then once they're able to do that, then that opens up the possibility of this new possibility that's beyond either of those, that can then inform both of those. And I believe that's what Jesus was talking about when he said, I am in the world, but I am not of the world. I'm in the world. I'm living as a human being with concepts and direct experience. But who I am is an infinite being that cannot be defined or constrained by any particular concept or by any particular direct experience. I believe that's what all spiritual teachers have attempted to point at. But most people are so entangled in this vicious circle of, of conceptually derived experiences that reinforce the limiting concept that shapes their perception, that when they hear what Jesus is saying, they cannot hear it. They can't hear what he's saying. They just put it into their concept of what he's saying. But they can't hear what he's saying. And so, you know, there's a lot of spiritual teachers that will tell you what Jesus is saying in different words. But that doesn't interest me. What interests me is being with students in such a way that they have the possibility of having access to that domain for themselves. And then using that infinite space to now completely inform their experience, inform their concepts, so that they know with a capital K, they know what Jesus was talking about when he said, I am in the world, i.e., I am having experiences, I have concepts, and I understand how they relate and can be used together. I use that in service to the infinite. I use that in service to love. I use that in service to life. So it's one thing to hear that and just turn that into another concept, or to maybe have a peak experience for 5 minutes. But it's another thing to get it like you know it. Like you love it so deeply, you know it, and you know it so deeply that you love it and you know it's who you are. When that is established, now there's a whole new possibility of being for you as a human being that only existed in potentia until that was activated. And so that's what I mean when I say I'm a practical visionary. That's what I mean when I say I'm a contemporary mystic, because I don't care if the spiritual teacher can say these things to their students. What I'm interested in is what's the quality of knowledge and life for their students. That's what interests me. And so my life's been dedicated to that commitment. How can I be and speak in such a way that what Jesus said is alive for my students, and they're able to translate that into how they get up in the morning, how they cook their breakfast, how they treat their neighbor, what goals they have and why they have them. To me, it's all one thing. To me, it's all a oneness. To me, it's all a unity. But that realization of unity is really different than having a concept about it. Or it's really different than having a peak experience 2 or 3 times in your life and wanting to get back to it, but not knowing how to get back to it. It's different. It's about knowing yourself as the source of it. To the extent that you know your oneness with Prime Creator, with the One, to that extent, that's Christ consciousness. And to And to conflate the possibility of Christ consciousness with one historical figure of Jesus is the biggest marketing scam ever.
Sorry, that's
It doesn't even jive with what he said, right? What he said was, all these things that I do, you shall do, and even greater than these shall you do. Okay? So the conflation of Christ consciousness with one historical figure that is going to save you is the biggest marketing scam ever. And if you buy that one, you're gone. Because then there's about 89 million other ideas that you start to buy into, and now you're gone.
so the openness that you're pointing to, you called it a 0 point field, which I've heard of. There are probably many words that describe it. It not just affects the physical body that we're walking around in. As you say, it affects everything, everyone. That is our perception of the world and then beyond.
And that's obvious. I mean,
Yeah.
have you ever been drunk?
College, few times.
Okay, so you know from direct experience that your biochemistry influences your perception, your judgment, your speech, your actions, what's possible. It's a oneness. That's what I'm saying. It's all one. It's all one. It's all different fractals of different frequency ranges of the unity, of the one. And it all interacts and all interrelates. And you can make interventions at any point. But if you can make interventions that are synergistically at multiple points, that's very powerful. If you can make biochemical interventions, if you can make structural and movement interventions, if you can make interventions in your people's beliefs about who they are and what's possible for them, and if you can make an intervention into the possible future that a person is living into in their consciousness, if you can help someone to be untethered to the limiting influences of their past traumas and how that colors people's perceptions of everything. If you can do those things, the more different levels you can get at it that synergize together, and you can do it at a pace that that student can handle at that point, it's so much more powerful than if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And to have the wisdom and the clinical judgment to know where to start with the person and how much they can handle at once and where they can get the most bang for their buck and have it be not too difficult, but not too easy. That's an art. There's a science to it. There's a philosophy to it, but ultimately it is a practice art, like singing, like golf, like dancing. It's an art. There's an art to it. You can't just be thinking about it. You can't just have concepts about it. You can't just have a few experiences with it. It has to be you. You know, imagine an NFL football player, a quarterback, and they have to think a lot during the play. It's not going to work.
Sports are always a great analogy for
Right? Or you're a concert violinist, and you know, if you want to be one with that piece of music, you can't be thinking about your technique at that time. It's not going to work. Right? So there's a level of mastery that comes with a certain type of disciplined, joyous practice that our society today knows almost nothing about. You know, many centuries ago, it was normal that a young man would would apprentice himself to someone who was really good at something for 5, 7 years, and then was qualified to do it. But that's not how society is organized now. Now people get out of school with a bunch of concepts, and then they're supposed to know something. There's no rites of passages anymore that are healthy, so because there's no, so now people get drunk as their rite of passage. Now people gamble, so it's like there's it's innate to uh, human development for men and women to need rites of passage that mark critical points in healthy development. But if you don't have healthy rites of passage, a society is going to default to dysfunctional rites of passage. Like the closest I got in my life to having a rite of passage was getting a driver's license. That was the first time I really felt like I had any sovereignty, like I had any freedom. But that's like giving a teenage boy a stick of dynamite. You know, it's like if that's our only rite of passage, God help us. Because because we live in a society that doesn't have an appreciation for rhythm, for seasons, for cycles. We live in a society where aging is the enemy. So I hope you're getting a sense of what a hero's journey it is to be born into a culture with this level of prevailing consciousness that we were born into, and then to extricate oneself from the way you're thrown to be in this ongoing journey of discovering more and more of who we really are is really, to me, is really the hero's journey. And to be and the batting average of succeeding in that journey go up enormously if you have a good guide and you have a community of fellow travelers that are committed to the same ideal and are committed to supporting each other and picking each other up when we're having hard times, and to celebrate each other's successes, and to be sort of a sangha that organizes around someone who's been a little further down the road for a while. And the whole point is not to create followers, but the whole point is to spawn leaders and then have them add their own special secret sauce to the teaching, and then live their own lives. That is a very organic way of growing and learning, but it's something that we don't know very much about in this culture, and it's tricky business because we've been duped so much in this culture with broken promises that so many people are living their lives being committed to avoiding being dominated, that the idea of entering into that kind of deep relationship between a student and a teacher can be very, very scary. And there's a lot of false teachers, there's a lot of false teachings, there's a lot of money that's gone into the spiritual game that has become a little bit watered down. And so it requires a lot of discernment, but it is real, it is possible, and it's for people who have a burning in their soul that nothing else will do. It's for people who, no matter what they do, no matter what they have, no matter how good the circumstances are, there's this fire within them that just isn't quenched. And it's that desire to know truth, not like know it like a concept, not like to know it like with one or two peak experiences in life, but to be an expression of that living truth. It's only when a soul has ripened to that point where where eventually that is so present and it can't be ignored anymore, that's when the movement starts to really, really happen. And it's really difficult to do if you feel like crap. It's really difficult if you feel in pain most of the time. It's really difficult if your uh, if your emotions and your thought processes are all over the place. It's really, really hard because we're multidimensional and all of these levels interrelate with each other, and any major change at one level is going to potentially ripple through other levels. And if you have blockages at other levels that don't allow that ripple to go all the way through, then you're going to come up against a new barrier. And how do you deal with that? And do you have an appreciation for how that whole process works? And do you have compassion for yourself? Do you have compassion for others, or do you make up new stories when the going gets tough that just smashes you back to where you were before? You know, and then do you stay stuck in that for 2 months? You know, it's not easy. It's not easy, but it is possible. And I hope this gives people a more mature appreciation for what really understanding why your hormones are moaning, to get to the place where you hear the message, to really see that that is a very valid entry point into going deeper into who you are and who you can be. And there are many different ways to enter into that spiritual journey, but certainly the the vehicle that I've offered through the book is one way to put your toe in the water and see how far you want to go. How's this hitting for you?
It's great. You know, it reminded me of, as you said, put the toe in the water and see how far you want to go. Um, I remember, I don't know if I read it or heard Dr. David Hawkins. He's kind of, you know, his presentations were cute. I think he said, you know, this state, as you said, this hero's journey, it really is. And he said something, I'm paraphrasing, about, you know, the process of letting go. And that most people, if you ask them, if God came and knocked on your door, you know, most people, and he said, follow me now, most people respond. And you said, you asked them, would you do that? A lot of people say, well, yes, of course I would. And he said, but what happens is not God would come and knock on the door and you'd say, oh, just wait. I got to go do this, or I got to take care of my paperwork, or I have to do all of these things that are in the physical world that we are attached to in some way, right? Or I can't leave my kids right now. I can't do that, right? And he said, so most people, when it comes down to it, it is the slow, for most people, a continuous, as you said, this process.
Well, also there's a delusion that if you're going to be spiritual, you have to leave your kids.
Yeah, and that was just one.
I mean,
But
that's
the attachment.
but I mean, that's a limited concept. That's a limited idea of what it means to be spiritual, and that limited idea influences their perception of the whole opportunity.
of I appreciated what he was saying, because what he was talking about in letting this, his particular thing was just letting go of that strong attachment that they are these physical, they have physical bodies, but that they are physical bodies, and that's it, right? Like,
This is why I mentioned the
going
importance of
past.
this is why I mentioned the importance of stewardship. It's very important to become a good steward of the body. It's very important to become a good steward of Mother Earth. It's very important to become a good steward of your money and of your time and where you put your focus and what you choose, what thoughts you choose to energize. But you are not your body.
Yeah.
You are not your finances. Okay? You're not your job. You're not your money. And so, like I said, I'm a practical visionary. You know, if you were starving, I wouldn't talk to you like this. If you were starving, I would give you a meal. And so to me, it's all one. To me, it's all one. We are so steeped in a dualistic pre-assumption that that belief in separation and polarity runs so deep. It's even reflected in the subject-object structure of the English language.
Yeah.
It runs so deep. And so to recognize that it's just one structure that allows for certain interpretations and certain possibilities that have value in some ways, but is limiting in other ways. So, for example, this way of looking at life that we were thrown to be in got us computers, it got us washing machines, right? It got us the internet, it got us to the moon. But it's not going to get us to star systems hundreds of light years away. It's not going to get you to know who you are. So it's getting beyond good and bad. It's getting beyond right or wrong. It's getting beyond this duality between me and God, between heaven and earth. It's getting beyond all that and seeing the play of life, the dance of life, that dynamism as an expression of a unity that's exploring its infinite potentialities through you, through me, through the dog, through the plant, through the rock, through the planet, through this philosophy, through that philosophy, through men, through women. That's what it means to be a contemporary mystic, means to be able to know the oneness in the play of contemporary life. There's so many unconscious assumptions and baggage and unexamined assumptions that are using people's lives in ways they have no idea, where the presupposition in the questions they ask limit the answer.
This is I understand what you're saying. Obviously, I did not take a spiritual path where I left. I said, sorry, kids, you're not my spiritual path. They are my spiritual path. I don't have to go looking for it because I realize it's right here. But it's also the attachment. And I realize if I say my children, I have a very different feeling inside about my kids than I do about the neighbors next door, even though I love them. There is a visceral feeling that creates a separation actually of and I think, and I don't mean that's in a bad way. I think it's part of the play, but I am aware that it is there. And I don't know if it's part of my path to go, oh, I feel the exact same way about
No.
my roof or another child down.
Oh, this is about boundaries. This is very important. There's an agape love. There's an unconditional agape love, but you have responsibilities toward you have unique responsibilities toward your own children that you don't have toward your neighbor's child.
Yeah.
Okay? And it's the ability to be sensitive to that without that diminishing your awareness of the agape unconditional love. You see,
Right.
it's the ability to get beyond this either or thinking to this and this. Okay? Like like if someone was pointing a gun at my son, and I believed that at the count of three, he was going to shoot my son, and I had a gun, and he said 1, 2, I would shoot that person. But that doesn't mean that I can't, that doesn't mean that I have to hate that person. Doesn't mean that I have to, doesn't mean I can't forgive that person.
Right.
It doesn't mean I can't bless that person and wish them well on their journey. And to be able to be like that, to be able to have discernment,
To be able to be the child that opens up the socks and be just as grateful for the socks as the bucket of candy.
you know, to be grateful for your challenges and your failures as well as your successes. To look for the opportunity for learning and growth in your failures as much as you enjoy your successes, even though they don't feel the same. You want to succeed, you're committed to succeeding, and you know that if you have big goals, sometimes you're going to fail. And that's okay too. And that's that balance that the Buddha talked about, right? Of total commitment and total non-attachment.
Yeah.
Right? Like right now, I'm completely committed to doing everything possible to be and vibe and speak in a way to provide the maximum value to you and to your tribe. But if I wasn't unattached to the fact that you might think I'm full of shit, if I was afraid of that, and if I was living in the fear of that, I wouldn't be able to do it. I wouldn't be able to be what I need to be in order to maximize the possibility of making a contribution to me. So I have to allow for the possibility that I'm going to give it my best shot and you're going to think I'm full of shit. And you see, this is really where progesterone comes in, right? Because progesterone is this ability to make space for whatever it is, whatever is right now, to be able to be with it in a spacious kind of way, right? So estradiol represents the divine feminine, the radiant, the receptive, the intuitive, the nurturing, the beautiful, right? Right? And testosterone represents the masculine, the direction, the motivation, the structure, the will. But what brings it all together? What allows it to come to fruition? What can you have it both? Can you be both? Can you be with the aspect of you that is your divine feminine? And can you honor that? And can you be with the aspect of you that's the divine masculine? Can you be with the aspects of life that express the divine feminine? Can you be with the aspects of your being that express the divine masculine? And can you be with it in a way that it's a oneness? And can you have it? Can you just be with it? Right? And the thing that hardly anybody in our society learns how to do is to just be with something, to just allow it to be, whether it's allowing yourself to be, allowing a circumstance to be as it is, allowing your bank balance to be as it is, allowing your body to be as it is in this moment. We're not trained. That's the last thing the ego would ever think of doing. And so to be able to have whatever it is that you're having, to be able to do whatever it is that you're doing, to be able to be with whatever you're being without judging it, to be able to be with it. You still have your preferences, but can you have it? So I have a preference that you would think this is fucking amazing, and that this would be the thing in your life that would be the most amazing thing ever, and your tribe would just totally love it, and they would all want to work with me, whatever. That would be like, okay, all right, I can have that possibility, but I can also have that possibility that you think I'm off the wall, full of shit, don't like me, and would never share it with anybody in your tribe. I've got to be able to have that possibility. I've got to be able to be with it so that I'm not spending my energy avoiding the domination of that possibility. So we're not trained to be that way. But yet being that way is amazing. You feel better, your results are better. And so progesterone is about being able to have it, to create the space for it. I mean, look at it even at a physical level. Progesterone allows you to create the space for the embryo and the fetus to grow and to be born. It can't happen without progesterone. So even at that level, it's about creating space.
Yeah, I wonder if next time we could talk about creating the space.
Yeah, I think you first have to create the possibility of creating space.
Okay.
You know, like it doesn't happen by itself. You know, it's like it's not one of those things that happens by itself just by being born. You know, like being born, you're gonna like be a kid, then you're gonna be a teenager, then you're gonna be a young adult. You don't have to make that happen. It doesn't require a free will choice. But to create that kind of space that I'm pointing at, you first have to create the possibility that you can create that space.
Let's next time talk about creating that possibility. And if we have time, it would be fun, even though I know we don't exactly know where things are going, but the evolution of what possibly is happening with the possible human.
Well, I mean, I think we hinted at it.
We hinted at it, but I'd like to go a little deeper.
Yeah, I mean, we can unpack it, but basically, the possibility for humans now is to go beyond the hypnotic delusion of separation.
Yeah.
That is the possibility. And what the reason there's so much galactic interest in this experiment is because apparently it's, from a universal standpoint, it's an unusual experiment for beings to have the opportunity to do that while they're in a physical body. And that's why there's such galactic interest in what's going on. And so we can unpack that. But that's the Cliff Notes version of the answer to your question. It's about the experiment of, while in a physical body, de-deluding yourself about the ultimate truth of separateness while honoring uniqueness. Because if you don't honor uniqueness, then you think, oh, communism's fantastic. Oh, anybody who wants to come into my house, come on in. Okay? So it's the ability to have appropriate boundaries and to honor uniqueness while de-deluding yourself from the hypnotic trance of separation while you're in a physical body. That's the opportunity that's before us. And within that, to have a balanced relationship and to be a good steward of technology. That is the opportunity that's facing us right now.
There's still a lot to unpack.
Yeah, but that's sort of sneak previews of coming attractions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I appreciate this once again. It's always, I guess, that openness and the wisdom that you're sharing and the pointers you're able to give. I deeply appreciate it. And learning is sometimes we say, to make some of the things that we feel uncomfortable more comfortable, being okay with it being uncomfortable, and that not knowing, and turning that part into this curiosity that, well, if it's not, what could be. That is, I think, very exciting, from many perspectives. And that's, and we do see in technology, it is from those questions of what could be that new tech, right, it comes about, whether, or what the human can do comes about by those great questions that we ask in sitting in the possibility.
And I'm interested in the question about the potential synergy. I'm very interested in the potential synergy between human consciousness and AI
Yeah.
in service to love and in service to life. I wouldn't have been able to write the book without that synergy.
Yeah, I would love to also talk about that. That is something that was discussed in a group not too long ago, about the
Yeah.
gift. Some people see it as a gift, some people, and so that would be great to continue with the conversation too, because a lot of people have questions or fears or
If
whatever
you
that
have
might
the book, you can read, it's very short, it's 2 pages. You can read Appendix D,
be.
as in
Okay,
David, in the book, which is how the book was written.
okay,
I couldn't have written it without AI because it's just not my nature to just sit down and write a 300-page book. It's just, it wouldn't have happened.
yeah,
And yet I had a lot that was in me that I wanted to express, and the synergistic skills that I brought to the party and the skills that AI, this version of AI brought to the party, and the process of interacting and iterating over and over was literally thrilling for me and blew my mind. It literally blew my mind that that book was written in 8 or 9 weeks.
yeah.
Even as
We
I tell
will,
you, even as I
yeah,
tell you that
still,
now, it's hard to
blown.
believe. Hard to
Well, we'll
believe.
discuss that next week about, we'll go into it. We'll keep going. So I appreciate your time, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks, Amy. This has been the third conversation, and I feel like we're winding down into some really powerful territory, and I appreciate you being willing to go along for the ride and also to prime the pump.
So once again, Dr. David's book is, my hormones must be moaning, because it just went, why are your hormones moaning? My brain went whoop. Please get it, read it, slowly, just let it be with it, be with all the stories and the words, and I think you'll get great value out of it. And we will see you next week.